At 2300 hours on June 15, 1945, Major Ezra Blackwood crouched in a muddy slit trench at 4 Yontan Airfield, watching a tropical storm try to rip Okinawa off the map. He was 25 years old, a Marine Corps pilot with 6 confirmed kills and a reputation for flying missions other men wouldn't touch. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he was just another soaked piece of meat listening to the sky scream the rain wasn't falling. It was being thrown sideways by 30-knot winds, each drop hitting exposed skin like buckshot. Lightning cracked the darkness every few seconds, turning the world white and black, white and black. Thunder followed so close it felt like artillery, the kind that walks up your spine and rattles your teeth. Above him, palm trees bent nearly horizontal. Canvas tents ripped free from their moorings and tumbled across the airstrip like drunk ghosts. The cloud ceiling had dropped below 500 feet, sealing the island inside a black coffin lid. To the thousands of Marines dug into the coral around the runway, this weather was miserable. But it was also safe. No aircraft could operate in this. The laws of physics didn't negotiate with typhoons. The day fighter squadrons were grounded. The Corsairs sat on the tarmac with their propellers lashed down, wings straining against canvas straps. The Mustangs were buttoned up tight in their revetments. Their pilots were in the tents playing cards and writing letters home, confident the war had called a timeout until sunrise. But Ezra Blackwood knew better. The Japanese didn't respect weather reports. They worshipped them. Bad weather meant American air superiority vanished. IT meant the carriers went blind. It meant the combat air patrols stayed on deck. It meant opportunity. High above the storm, or maybe skimming just below the cloud deck, enemy engines were droning. Blackwood couldn't hear them over the thunder, but he knew they were there. They always came when the weather turned evil. Single planes, sometimes 2 or 3. They called them washing machine Charlies. Harassment raiders sent to drop bombs on sleeping men and keep everyone awake and afraid. They used the darkness like a cloak. They knew the terrifying American fighter force was useless at night. The day fighters relied on eyeballs, on seeing the enemy silhouetted against clouds or catching the glint of sunlight on a canopy. If you couldn't see it, you couldn't kill it. And in this pitch-black soup, a Corsair pilot would be lucky to see his own wingtip, let alone a Japanese bomber painted black. The enemy owned the night. They operated with complete impunity, mocking the most powerful navy in the world by simply waiting for the sun to go down. But Blackwood wasn't looking at the sky with fear. He was looking at it with cold calculation. He knew there was an answer sitting on the flight line less than 100 yards away. A solution that most pilots treated like a sick joke. The Grumman F6 F5N Night HELLCAT. To the casual observer, it looked like the standard HELLCAT that had won the Pacific Air War. Same barrel chest, same massive Pratt & Whitney radial engine, same brutal simplicity that made it a killer. But look closer and you saw the problem. Hanging off the outer starboard wing was a white bulbous pod the size of a beer keg. It looked like a tumor growing out of the smooth aluminum skin. It ruined the clean lines of the aircraft. It looked heavy, awkward, completely out of place on a machine built for speed and violence. This was the AN/APS-6 radar pod. To the engineers back in the States, it was a technological miracle, a miniaturized microwave radar system that could see through clouds and darkness, a weapon that turned night into day. To the day fighter pilots, it was dead weight, a liability, a joke. They called the night HELLCAT names: the flying refrigerator, the tumor plane, the one-winged wonder. They pointed out the obvious physics of hanging 200 pounds of metal on one wingtip. It made the plane fly crooked. It created massive drag like driving a race car with the parking brake on and an anchor tied to the roof. It killed the HELLCAT's legendary speed. It murdered the climb rate. It made the aircraft sluggish in a dogfight. In the warrior culture of naval aviation, speed was survival. Anything that slowed you down was a death sentence. 3 days ago, Blackwood had been in the ready room tent when Captain Wade Donovan walked in. Donovan was a Corsair ace with 12 kills painted under his canopy. Tall, handsome, the kind of pilot who looked good in photographs, the kind who got interviewed for newsreels. Donovan had spotted Blackwood sitting alone, studying radar intercept geometry in a technical manual. "Still reading that comic book, Hawk," Donovan had said, loud enough for the other pilots to hear. The nickname Hawk had started as respect. In Donovan's mouth it sounded like mockery. Blackwood hadn't looked up. "Still trying to figure out how to see in the dark, Wade. Real pilots don't need a green TV screen to find a fight." Donovan pulled up a chair, uninvited. "We use our eyes, the things God gave us." "God didn't give us the ability to see through clouds." "Then maybe we're not supposed to fight in clouds." Donovan leaned back, grinning. "That tumor hanging off your wing makes you 15 knots slower than a stock HELLCAT. 15 knots. That's the difference between catching a zero and watching it run away. I'm not hunting zeros in daylight." "You're not hunting anything." Donovan stood. "You've been here 3 weeks, Hawk. I've got 12 kills. You've got 2, maybe 3 if we're being generous about that last one." The other pilots had gone quiet, watching. Blackwood closed the manual, looked up. "I fly when you can't, Wade. That's my job. Not racking up numbers when the sky's clear and the enemy's outlined against white clouds. Your job is flying a garbage truck while real pilots fly fighters." Blackwood had stood then. Not aggressively, just tired. "When the sun comes up tomorrow, you'll have targets. Until then, sleep well." He'd walked out. Behind him, someone laughed. Someone always laughed. But that had been 3 days ago. Before the raids got worse. Tonight was different. The field phone in the trench vibrated against Blackwood's leg. He grabbed it, water pouring off his poncho. "Blackwood." The voice on the other end was female, crisp, professional. Lieutenant Ruth Castellano. The ground radar controller who sat in a dry bunker 3 miles inland, watching a scope the size of a dinner plate. "Major, I have contacts. 3 bogies inbound from the north, bearing 020, range 15 miles, altitude estimated 3,000 feet. Till Blackwood's pulse didn't change. "Confirmed hostile?" "They're not ours, sir. No IFF response. Speed and heading consistent with bomber profile. They're using the storm front to mask their approach." "Where are they going?" A pause, then, "Current track puts them over the fleet anchorage in 12 minutes. Hospital ship Comfort is lit up like a Christmas tree. 800 wounded aboard." Blackwood closed his eyes, took a breath. "Can anyone else launch?" "Negative. Tower has grounded all-day fighters. Wind shear's too extreme for conventional takeoff. You're the only asset with instrument capability." "I'm one plane, Ruth. You're the only plane that can see them, sir." He looked out at the runway. It wasn't a runway anymore. It was a river of mud with standing water deep enough to drown a man. The crosswind was gusting 40 knots. The visibility was 0. Taking off in this violated every safety protocol ever written. If he crashed, they'd call it pilot error. Proof the night HELLCAT program was a failure. Proof that night fighting was impossible. But if he didn't launch, 3 Japanese planes would drop their payloads on a ship full of men who couldn't defend themselves. Marines who'd already given everything at Iwo Jima and Saipan and a dozen other coral tombs. Men who deserved to make it home. "I'm launching," he said. "Sir, Tower hasn't cleared. I'm not asking Tower, Ruth. I'm telling you. Prep for intercept guidance." He dropped the phone and stood. Water poured off him in sheets. Across the tarmac, a figure emerged from the darkness. Master Sergeant Virgil Kane. 45 years old, built like a fire hydrant with hands that could rebuild an engine blindfolded. He'd been Blackwood's crew chief for 6 months, longer than most pilots kept the same crew. Kane carried a flashlight in one hand and a toolbox in the other. His face was grim. "Sir, I heard the call on the ground net." "Bird ready?" "She's ready." Kane hesitated. "But you need to know something." They walked toward the revetment where the night HELLCAT waited. The aircraft looked wrong in the lightning flashes, predatory and ungainly at the same time. The radar pod gleamed white against the dark paint. Kane set down the toolbox, raised his voice over the wind. "The electrical system's vulnerable in heavy rain like this. Water gets into the junction boxes, you risk shorts in the radar array. If that happens mid-mission, I fly blind." "Yes, sir. Blind like everyone else, except you'll be alone, in a typhoon, chasing ghosts." Blackwood looked at the aircraft, at the pod that made it slow and awkward, at the green-tinted canopy that marked it as different, as other. How long before the system's at risk? No way to know. Could be 5 minutes, could be 30. Rain this heavy. Electricity and water don't play nice. "Then I'd better fly fast." Kane almost smiled. "Yes, sir." They prepped the aircraft in silence. Kane checked the control surfaces while Blackwood did his walk-around by flashlight. The HELLCAT looked solid, brutal, the kind of machine you could fly into a mountain and walk away from. He was strapping into the cockpit when another figure appeared out of the rain, Captain Wade Donovan. The Corsair pilot stood below the wing, looking up. His face was hard to read in the darkness. "Blackwood." "Donovan." "This is insane. You know that, right?" "So I've been told. Crosswinds 40 knots. Gusting higher. You'll flip on takeoff." "Maybe." Donovan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I was wrong about you." Blackwood paused, one hand on the throttle. "What?" "I said you were flying a garbage truck. I was wrong." Donovan stepped closer. "You're either the bravest pilot I've ever met or the craziest." "Little of both." "Good luck, Hawk. Bring her back." It wasn't an apology, but it was respect. That mattered more. Blackwood finished strapping in, 5-point harness, tight enough to feel it compress his ribs. He flipped the master switch and the instrument panel glowed red. In the center of the console, the radar scope flickered to life. A green eye opening in the dark, he cranked the engine. The massive Pratt and Whitney radial coughed once, spat blue flame from the exhaust stacks, then caught with a sound like controlled thunder. The propeller spun into a blur, chewing through the rain. The whole airframe vibrated, shaking the water off the wings in sheets. The radar pod wobbled on its mount, looking fragile in the exhaust light. But tonight, that white blob was the most dangerous weapon on the island. Blackwood released the brakes. The HELLCAT lurched forward, splashing through puddles deep enough to bury the wheels. He fought the rudder pedals, wrestling the nose straight as the wind tried to push him sideways off the steel matting. The tower was screaming something over the radio. He ignored it. He pushed the throttle to the firewall. The engine howled. The tail lifted. The wheels left the mud. He was airborne, climbing into the black throat of hell. The ground lights disappeared instantly, swallowed by the storm. He retracted the landing gear and felt the aircraft settle into its crooked flight attitude, the radar pod pulling the starboard wing down, always down. He trimmed for it, adjusted, made the unbalanced balanced. Then he locked his eyes on the green scope and keyed the radio. "Tower, Ghost 1 is airborne, proceeding to intercept." Ruth Castellano's voice came back steady as stone. "Copy, Ghost 1. I have you on scope. Targets bearing 015, range 12 miles. Beginning vector guidance." The mockery was over. The hunt had begun. Flying a fighter plane in a tropical storm is like being locked inside a washing machine full of rocks. Inside the cockpit of the night HELLCAT, the world was violence. The rain hammered the plexiglass canopy so hard it sounded like gravel thrown from a moving truck. Wind shear grabbed the 12,000-pound aircraft and shook it like a toy. Major Ezra Blackwood fought the control stick with both hands, arms tense, just trying to keep the wings somewhere close to level. He couldn't see the ocean below, couldn't see the stars above. He was suspended in a void where up and down were just suggestions, unless you trusted the instruments. But Blackwood wasn't looking at the artificial horizon. His eyes were locked on the small glowing circle in the center of the dashboard, the radar scope. Radar, 3 inches of green, phosphorescent glass that separated him from every other pilot in the Pacific. To the day fighter jocks, this screen was incomprehensible, a mess of static and wavy lines. They called it the flicker box and claimed it was useless. To Blackwood, it was a window into another dimension. The radar pod on his starboard wing was sending out pulses of radio energy, invisible waves that punched through rain and clouds and darkness. When those pulses hit something solid, metal, wood, flesh, they bounced back. The returns painted themselves on the scope as blobs of light. Using this system required a different kind of courage than daylight combat. A day pilot relied on reflexes and vision. He saw the enemy, reacted, fired. Instinct. A night pilot had to be half mathematician, half priest. He had to trust that the smudge of light on the screen was actually an aircraft and not a ghost return or cloud reflection. He had to fly based on numbers, range, bearing, altitude, while his inner ear screamed that he was upside down and spinning. It was like performing surgery in a closet with the lights off, guided only by a voice on the radio. Ruth Castellano's voice cut through the static. Ghost 1, contacts bearing 018, range 8 miles, altitude 3,000. They're descending. Attack profile. Blackwood adjusted the gain knob on the radar set, filtering out the clutter from the heavy rain. The screen cleared slightly, and there, at the top edge of the scope, he saw them, 3 bright blips, moving south with purpose, not drifting like weather, moving like machines with intent. "I have them on scope," he said. "Beginning intercept." He pushed the throttle forward. The big Pratt & Whitney responded with a surge of power. The HELLCAT accelerated, the airframe shuddering as it pushed through the turbulent air. Range, 7 miles, 6, 5. The dead weight of the radar pod became an asset now. In a high-speed dogfight, the asymmetric drag was a death sentence. It killed your turn rate, made you predictable. But here, in the stalking game of night combat, it acted like a stabilizer. The extra weight on the starboard wing dampened the HELLCAT's tendency to get twitchy in turbulence. It made the aircraft a steady platform, solid. Blackwood didn't need to be an acrobat tonight. He needed to be a sniper. He realized something the Japanese pilots didn't know yet. They felt safe. They thought the storm was their shield. They thought the Americans were huddled on the ground, blind and helpless. That false sense of security was going to kill them. Range, 4 miles. He eased back on the stick, climbing slightly, coming at them from below. This was the cat's eye tactic. Use the darkness of the ocean as camouflage, while the enemy was silhouetted against the lighter clouds above. He was a shark rising from the deep. Range, 3 miles. The blips on the scope separated as the resolution sharpened. Lead aircraft in the center, 2 smaller contacts flanking it. Tight formation. Flying wing to wing to stay visual with each other in the soup. Blackwood's mind calculated Instacorts were single-engine, Zeros or Oscars. They were so focused on not losing sight of each other that they never looked behind. Back at Yontan, Master Sergeant Virgil Kane stood in the rain beside the radar truck, listening to the radio chatter. He couldn't hear Blackwood's transmissions clearly through the static, but he heard Ruth Castellano's calm voice guiding the intercept. He checked his watch. The Major had been airborne 23 minutes, in this weather, burning fuel like a torch. Kane did the math in his head. Fuel for maybe 40 minutes of combat flying, maximum, and the fight hadn't even started yet. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and waited. Range, 2 miles. Blackwood checked his weapons. The night HELLCAT carried a different loadout than standard fighters. 4 50-caliber machine guns for volume and 2 20mm cannons that fired explosive shells. Each round hit like a hand grenade. Against a fragile bomber full of fuel and bombs, the cannons were devastating. Range, 1 mile. He shifted his focus from the radar screen to the windscreen, strained his eyes against the darkness and rain. At first, nothing, just black streaks on black. Then, there, a flicker, faint and blue, exhaust flames from the formation's engines. The Japanese didn't use flame dampeners as effectively as the Americans. Those tiny blue lights were beacons. Range, 1/2 mile. The flickers resolved into shapes. The lead aircraft was definitely a Betty. That distinctive cigar-shaped fuselage with the greenhouse nose, wide wings, vulnerable. Flanking it were 2 smaller fighters. They were so close their wingtips nearly touched. Flying formation by watching the flames, terrified of losing visual contact in the storm. They had no idea death was parking behind them. Blackwood made a cold calculation. If he shot the bomber first, the explosion might alert the fighters. They might scatter, might get lucky and escape. But if he took the escorts quietly, one at a time, the others might not notice in the chaos of the storm. He wasn't a knight, he was an executioner. He slid the HELLCAT sideways, drifting into the blind spot of the right-hand Zero. The turbulence bumped his wing, but the heavy radar pod kept the aircraft stable, steady as a rifle on sandbags. Range, 200 yards. 100. He was so close now he could see details. The rivet lines on the Zero's tail, the antenna wire stretched from the vertical stabilizer, the pilot's head moving in the cockpit, scanning forward, never back. For just a moment, Blackwood saw the man. Young, maybe 20, a human being with a family, someone's son, someone who'd kissed his mother goodbye and promised to come home. His finger hesitated on the trigger. Then Ruth Castellano's voice. Ghost One, they're 8 miles from the hospital ship. 800 wounded men. Americans, Marines who'd bled on coral beaches and survived, who deserved to see home. Blackwood put the glowing pipper of his gun sight squarely on the Zero's fuselage. He squeezed. The night HELLCAT didn't just fire, it shuddered. The 20mm cannons cycled with a heavy, rhythmic thump, 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 while the machine guns ripped a high-speed buzzsaw through the air. The effect on the Zero was immediate and catastrophic. Cannon shells walked up the fuselage, blowing fist-sized holes in the thin aluminum. The fuel tank in the wing root ignited. The plane didn't explode, it folded. The wings snapped off at the roots and the burning wreckage tumbled away into the darkness below. It happened in 3 seconds. The other 2 aircraft didn't react. The storm was too loud, the visibility too poor. They just kept flying straight, assuming their wingman was still there in the dark. Blackwood checked the radar scope. 2 blips remaining. He shifted his aim to the left-hand fighter. This time he had to cross behind the bomber's tail. The Betty carried a 20mm tail gun of its own. If the gunner saw him, Blackwood would take explosive shells to the face at point-blank range. He held his breath, drifted across the bomber's wake. The prop wash from the big aircraft kicked the HELLCAT sideways. He corrected, fought it back into position. He settled behind the second Zero. Closer this time. Range, 100 yards. And then he saw it. The tail gunner in the Betty wasn't asleep. The turret was rotating, searching, sweeping the darkness behind the formation, looking for whatever had killed the first fighter. Looking for him. Blackwood had seconds before that 20mm cannon found him. The turret was turning his direction, slowly, methodically. If the gunner spotted his exhaust flames, Blackwood would take explosive shells to the face at point-blank range. He made a split-second decision, fired at the Zero before he had the perfect shot, before he was fully lined up. The cannon shells walked across the Zero's wing route, not center mass, not the clean kill he wanted, but the wing folded anyway. The Zero rolled violently out of control and collided with the Betty's tail section. The impact tore the bomber's rudder completely off. Metal screamed. Both aircraft tumbled into the darkness below, locked together in a death spiral. 2 kills, 1 trigger pull, pure luck. Or maybe the dead-weight radar pod had steadied his aim just enough. Blackwood didn't have time to think about it. The bomber pilot must have felt the collision, must have known his escort was gone, and something lethal was hunting him in the dark. The Betty suddenly banked hard left, diving toward the ocean. The pilot was panicking, executing a violent, evasive maneuver. He knew something was back there. He couldn't see it, but he knew. He was a whale trying to shake a shark in the dark. Blackwood slammed the stick over. The HELLCAT rolled, following the bomber into the dive. The heavy aircraft picked up speed like a falling anvil. Wind screamed over the canopy. The radar scope showed the bomber's blip moving erratically, jinking, changing heading every few seconds. The pilot was good, trained, trying to break the radar lock. Blackwood's altimeter unwound rapidly. 3,000 feet, 2,000. They were getting dangerously close to the water. In pitch-black darkness with no visual reference, diving this low was suicide. One wrong pull and you'd fly straight into the ocean at 300 miles per hour. The radio altimeter began flashing a warning. He was running out of sky. He pushed the throttle to emergency war power. The engine roared. Water methanol injection kicked in, boosting horsepower past redline. The HELLCAT surged forward, closing the gap. Range, 1 mile. He looked through the windscreen, saw the exhaust flames dancing wildly as the bomber maneuvered. He was lining up the shot when the radar scope suddenly bloomed with light. Not the target, something else. A massive wall of solid returns appeared at the bottom of the scope. It wasn't the ocean. The ocean didn't paint like that. It was the fleet. Blackwood's blood went cold. The Japanese pilot wasn't just diving to escape. He was diving to attack. He'd led Blackwood right into the middle of the American transport anchorage. The radar was painting dozens of Liberty ships and destroyers anchored in the bay, and every single one of them had nervous gunners waiting for a sound in the dark. If the ships opened fire, they wouldn't distinguish between friendly and hostile. They'd put up a curtain of steel that would shred everything in the sky. Blackwood was trapped between an enemy bomber and 1,000 friendly guns. The bomber leveled off at 500 feet, skimming the waves. The bomb bay doors opened. The pilot was lining up on a massive ship, lit up like a beacon. Hospital ship Comfort. White hull with red crosses painted on the sides. Geneva Convention protection. 800 men aboard. Sleeping. Wounded. Helpless. The bomber was seconds from release. Blackwood couldn't shoot from behind. Not this close to the ships. Stray rounds would hit American steel, kill American sailors. He had to get alongside, had to get between the bomber and the target. He kicked the rudder hard, shoved the stick forward. The HELLCAT dropped below the bomber, skimming feet above the whitecaps. Salt spray hit his windscreen. He pulled up, sliding directly underneath the belly of the Japanese plane. It was a maneuver called the underbelly approach. Dangerous, insane, strictly forbidden in every training manual ever written. If the bomber exploded, the debris would take him with it. He looked up through the canopy. The belly of the Betty bomber filled his entire field of vision. He could see the open bomb bay, the dark shapes of ordnance hanging in the racks, torpedoes, 2 of them. If those hit Comfort, the ship would sink in minutes. Everyone aboard would die. Blackwood tilted the nose of the HELLCAT upward, aiming his guns vertically into the guts of the enemy aircraft. Distance, 50 feet. He clamped down on the triggers. and didn't let go. The cannons and machine guns erupted at point-blank range, firing straight up into the bomber's belly. There was no missing. The heavy 20mm shells smashed through the thin aluminum skin like a sledgehammer through wet cardboard. They didn't just puncture the fuselage, they gutted it. Rounds severed hydraulic lines, shattered wing spars, tore into the bomb bay itself. The fuel tanks ruptured. The Betty bomber became a fireball that lit up the night like a second sun. The explosion was so violent it stopped the rain. A shockwave of heat and pressure slammed into Blackwood's HELLCAT, hammering it downward toward the ocean. He was flying through a cloud of burning gasoline and shrapnel. A piece of the bomber's wing, massive, jagged, cartwheeled past his canopy, missing by inches. The flash blinded him instantly. His night vision was gone. He was flying a 12,000-pound aircraft at 300 miles per hour, 50 feet above the water, and he was completely blind. Blackwood reacted on instinct, hauled back on the stick, pulled the nose up, jammed the throttle forward, demanding every ounce of power. The HELLCAT shuddered as it plowed through smoke and fire and debris. Metal struck the fuselage, engine parts, aluminum fragments, the shattered remnants of torpedoes. The engine faltered, ingested smoke, fired intermittently like a dying man, coughing. Then the cylinders cleared, the Pratt and Whitney roared back to life. Blackwood climbed away from the inferno. His vision slowly returned. Purple after-images, spots of light, but he could see again. The darkness was back. But it wasn't silent anymore. The explosion had woken the fleet. Every gunner on every ship had seen the fireball and reacted. They didn't know it was an American victory. They just saw fire and assumed attack. The sky filled with tracers. Chains of red and white light erupted from destroyers and transports, crisscrossing the air in a frantic spiderweb of steel. The 5-inch guns opened up, throwing proximity-fused shells that exploded in black flowers of shrapnel. They were shooting at everything and nothing, and Blackwood was inside the kill zone. The radar scope was useless now. The clutter from exploding shells and the mass of ships below turned the green screen into a solid block of light. He couldn't see the enemy, couldn't see the water, could only see the tracers reaching for him. He was a fly caught in a spiderweb made of bullets. He keyed the radio, screaming the IFF code into the microphone. "Flash, flash, flash, friendly aircraft, ceasefire." Static. The radio waves were jammed with panicked shouting from ship captains and the electrical interference of the storm. No one was listening. No one could hear him. Then the searchlights found him. 3 beams lanced up from a destroyer, converging on the HELLCAT like the fingers of an angry god. The cockpit flooded with white light so bright it hurt. Blackwood was pinned, exposed, a perfect target painted against the night. The destroyer's 5-inch guns traversed, tracking him. He saw the muzzle flashes an instant before the shells arrived. They were firing proximity-fused rounds, shells that didn't need to hit, they just needed to get close. When they sensed an aircraft nearby, they detonated, throwing shrapnel in a killing sphere 30 feet wide. The first shell exploded 50 yards ahead. Black smoke and orange fire. The shockwave rocked the HELLCAT sideways. Blackwood rolled the aircraft onto its side, breaking away from the searchlight beams, turned hard toward open water, stayed low, right on the deck. Hoping the ship's radar couldn't pick him up against the wave returns, another shell burst behind him, close enough to hear the fragments rattle against the tail. He watched tracers arc over his head, some so close he could see the glowing cores, red streaks moving at 2,800 feet per second, each one looking for him, hunting. He was running a gauntlet through hell. He pushed the water methanol injection button. The engine screamed in protest. Boost pressure climbed past redline. The HELLCAT vibrated violently, pushing past 400 miles per hour. Every rivet in the airframe felt like it was trying to escape. He was riding a controlled explosion through a tunnel of fire. Minutes passed like hours. Slowly, agonizingly, the tracers began to fall behind. The wall of noise faded. The searchlights lost their grip. He broke out of the engagement zone and climbed back into the solitude of the storm, safe from the guns. But not safe yet. He checked his fuel gauges. Both needles were kissing empty, the white arcs, the danger zone. He'd been running emergency power for too long. The combat maneuvering and the water injection had drained the tanks dry. He had maybe 10 minutes of flight time, maybe less. And he was lost. The violent evasive maneuvers had disoriented him completely. In the darkness, with no stars and no horizon, he'd lost track of his heading. The radio compass was spinning uselessly. The magnetic field, disrupted by electrical interference from the storm or battle damage, he couldn't tell which. He was alone, low on fuel, flying blind in a typhoon. This was how you died in the Pacific. Not in a blaze of glory with guns firing, but alone in the dark, running out of gas, spinning into the ocean with no witnesses. Blackwood checked his watch. He'd been airborne for 47 minutes. A HELLCAT carried enough fuel for about 2 hours of combat flying under normal conditions. But tonight hadn't been normal. The high power climbs, the emergency boost. The fuel burn had been catastrophic. The engine ran smooth now, but that wouldn't last. When the tanks went dry, there'd be no warning, just a cough, a sputter, then silence, then gravity. He tried the radio again. Tower, Ghost 1, requesting homing vector, static. Voices talking over each other, the chaos of the fleet engagement still clogging the frequencies. He was about to try again when a single voice cut through the noise. Ghost 1, if you can hear me, key your mic twice. Ruth Castellano, calm, steady as stone. Blackwood keyed twice. I have you on ground radar, Major. You're 8 miles south of the field. Bearing 340 will bring you home. Winds are 30 knots from the east. You need to account for 15 degrees right drift. He almost laughed. Almost. Ruth, I don't have a compass. I don't have radar. I'm running on fumes. A pause, then, I know, I'll talk you down. Turn right to heading 355. Trust me, I'm your eyes now. Ye trust? That was the word. That was everything. He trusted a radar scope to see in the dark, trusted a green blob of light to be an enemy aircraft, trusted his guns to fire true and his engine to keep running. Now he had to trust a voice. He turned right, flew the heading she gave him, descended slowly, carefully, watching the altimeter unwind. You're drifting left, Castellano said. Correct, 5 degrees right, he corrected. Good, steady, you're 7 miles out. Begin descent to 2,000 feet. He eased the stick forward. The HELLCAT dropped into thicker air. The rain intensified, hammering the canopy. 6 miles. Descend to 1,000 feet. The engine was running smooth. But for how long? 5 miles, you're slightly right of center line. Turn left 3 degrees. He made the adjustment. His hands were steady on the controls, his breathing calm. But inside, his mind was calculating. 5 miles at current speed meant 90 seconds. 90 seconds of fuel remaining. Maybe. 4 miles, descend to 500 feet. The turbulence got worse at lower altitude. The wind shear tried to flip him over. He fought it, kept the wings level. 3 miles, you're perfect on track. Begin final descent. 3 miles, 45 seconds. 2 miles, descend to 300 feet. The rain was so heavy now he couldn't see past the propeller spinner. Just water streaming over glass, and then the engine coughed, not loud, just a hiccup, a momentary loss of power. The fuel pumps sucking air. Blackwood's pulse spiked. "Ruth, engine's cutting out. Fuel starvation." "I know, you're 1 mile out. Descend to 200 feet. You should see lights." Should. That was a hell of a word. He dropped lower, 150 feet above the ocean according to the radar altimeter. The engine coughed again. Longer this time. The propeller slowed. The airspeed bled off. He was gliding now. The HELLCAT was a 12,000-pound brick with wings. When the engine quit completely, he'd have maybe 30 seconds before he hit the water. "Ruth, I don't see anything." "You will. Trust me. 500 yards. Look for the lights." The engine quit. Total silence except for the wind, the propeller windmilling uselessly. Blackwood had seconds. He held the nose level, kept the airspeed at 90 knots. The stall speed was 70. If he dropped below that, the HELLCAT would fall out of the sky like a stone. 200 yards, Major. Dead ahead." He strained his eyes against the rain and darkness. And then he saw them. 2 rows of dim yellow lights. Faint. Wavering through the rain, but there. The runway. Castellano had guided him down a virtual wire straight to the threshold. Blind. In a typhoon. With a dead engine. He was aligned perfectly. He dropped the landing gear. The wheels locked down with a heavy thunk. No hydraulic power, just gravity and mechanical linkage. He lowered the flaps manually, felt the lift grab the wings. The HELLCAT was slowing, sinking. He had no power to arrest the descent. He was committed now. 1 chance. The lights grew closer. He could see the steel matting of the runway now, the puddles reflecting the faint glow. He pulled the nose up slightly. Flared. The main wheels touched the wet steel with a screech. The plane bounced once, settled. The tail wheel came down. He tapped the brakes. The HELLCAT skidded on the waterlogged surface, hydroplaning sideways. He fought the rudder pedals, keeping it straight through sheer willpower and muscle memory. The aircraft slowed, rolled, stopped. 20 feet from the end of the runway. Silence. Just the rain drumming on metal. Blackwood sat in the cockpit. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him hollow. He rested his forehead against the instrument panel. The radar scope was dark, dead. The fuel gauges both showed 0. He'd launched into a hurricane, killed 3 aircraft, dodged a fleet's worth of anti-aircraft fire, navigated home blind, and landed on a dead stick with an empty tank. The canopy slid back. Rain poured into the cockpit. Master Sergeant Virgil Kane was already there, climbing onto the wing with a flashlight. "Sir, let me help you." Blackwood tried to stand. His legs wouldn't cooperate. Kane grabbed his arm, steadied him. "Easy, Major. You've been at full combat tension for 50 minutes. Your body's shutting down." Blackwood sat on the wing, rain soaking through his flight suit. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't light a cigarette. Kane lit it for him. 3 of them, Chief. The bomber was going for the hospital ship. "I know, sir. We heard everything on the ground net." Kane shined his flashlight over the aircraft. Jesus Christ. The HELLCAT looked like it had fought its way through hell. Scorch marks ran along the belly. Embedded shrapnel peppered the fuselage. Paint tripped from the leading edges. A piece of Japanese aluminum the size of a dinner plate stuck in the oil cooler. But the aircraft was intact. "She brought me home," Blackwood said quietly. "You brought each other home, sir." Figures emerged from the darkness. Captain Wade Donovan led a group of day fighter pilots through the rain. They stopped 10 feet away, staring at the battered night HELLCAT, at the physical proof embedded in the cowling. Donovan stepped forward. For a long moment, He just looked at Blackwood, then he extended his hand. "I was wrong about you, about the aircraft, about all of it." Blackwood shook his hand, said nothing. "The gun camera footage is being developed now," Donovan continued. "We'll see it at dawn, but I don't need to see it. I believe you." Another figure approached, Captain Bill Morrison. The infantry officer looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. "Major Blackwood," his voice was rough. "The hospital ship, that was their target. 800 men aboard, wounded from Iwo Jima, Saipan, Peleliu, men who already gave everything." "I know. You saved them, every single one." Blackwood took a drag on the cigarette. "Just doing my job, Captain." "No, sir, you did everyone's job. You flew when no one else could." The field phone in the radar truck rang. An operator answered, then called out, "Major Blackwood! Ground control wants you." Blackwood slid off the wing, walked to the truck on unsteady legs, picked up the phone. "Blackwood?" "Major," Ruth Castellano's voice, still calm, still steady. "I wanted to make sure you were down safe." "I'm down, thanks to you." "You did the flying, sir. I just read numbers off a screen." "Ruth." He closed his eyes. "If you hadn't guided me home, I'd be in the ocean right now. You saved my life."
A pause. "Then, we're even then, Major. You saved 800. I saved 1. I got the better deal." Despite everything, Blackwood almost smiled. "Get some rest, Lieutenant." "You too, sir. And Major, that was some of the finest flying I've ever vectored. It was an honor." The line clicked off. Kane appeared at his shoulder. "Sir, I checked the fuel tanks. Bone dry. You landed with maybe 30 seconds of engine time left." "I know."
"And the electrical system, I found water damage in 3 junction boxes. Your radar was failing. You had maybe 2 more minutes before total shutdown." "I know that too, Chief." "Sir, you understand what you just did, right? You proved the entire concept. Night fighting, radar intercept, all-weather operations. This changes everything." Blackwood looked at his aircraft, at the white tumor that had saved his life and killed 3 enemies. "The bird did the work," he said quietly. "I just pointed it." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The aircraft was a tool. The radar was a tool. But tools didn't make decisions in the dark. Tools didn't calculate intercept angles while flying through a typhoon. Tools didn't execute underbelly attacks at 50 feet. Men did that. But Blackwood would never say it. That wasn't who he was. Kane helped him to the ready room tent, got him dry clothes and hot coffee. Blackwood sat in a canvas chair, too exhausted to move. Donovan came in an hour later with the gun camera footage. They set up the projector and dimmed the lights. The film was grainy, black and white, but it told the story in stark detail. The exhaust flames of the Zeros, invisible to the naked eye but clear on film. The violent disintegration as cannon shells tore through aluminum. The collision of the second Zero with the bomber's tail. The massive fireball when the Betty exploded from below. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Donovan stood. "That footage gets sent to every carrier in the Pacific. Every squadron, every pilot needs to see what's possible." The news spread like wildfire across Yontan airfield. By dawn, everyone knew, the night HELLCAT hadn't just survived, it had wiped out an entire strike package. Alone, in conditions that grounded everyone else. Within a week, 3 more night HELLCATs arrived at Yontan. Pilots who'd mocked the radar pod now volunteered for night fighter training. The tactics Blackwood proved that night, radar intercept, blind flying, trusting instruments over instinct, became standard doctrine. The numbers told the story without embellishment. Night raid casualties dropped 82%. Japanese harassment bombing became a suicide mission. The enemy stopped coming after dark. By the time the war ended in August 1945, night HELLCAT squadrons across the Pacific had logged dozens of confirmed kills. Not a single night fighter was lost to enemy action. Major Ezra Blackwood flew 30 more night missions before the surrender. 7 confirmed kills total, 2 probable. He never spoke about the missions in detail, never sought recognition. When reporters asked about the night he saved the hospital ship, he said only, "The aircraft did the work, I just pointed it." Lieutenant Ruth Castellano vectored 47 night intercepts from her ground radar station without losing a single pilot. After the war, she became the Navy's first female radar doctrine instructor, training an entire generation of controllers. When the Smithsonian asked for Blackwood's aircraft in 1946, he agreed on one condition: Ruth Castellano's name goes on the plaque alongside his. The night HELLCAT's legacy reached farther than anyone imagined that stormy night in June. In 1952, F-94 Starfires hunted MiGs over Korea using the same intercept geometry Blackwood had calculated in his head while flying through a typhoon. By 1985, every fighter in the American arsenal was a night fighter. The F-15 Eagle could track targets 100 miles away in pitch darkness. Day and night meant nothing anymore. Today, the F-35 sees everything, everywhere, in any weather. The concept of a day fighter is extinct, but it all started with a lopsided plane with a white tumor on its wing and a pilot willing to fly into hell. 50 years after that night, a restored F-6F-5N night HELLCAT sits in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. The white radar pod still bears dents from June 15, 1945. Battle damage preserved as testament. The plaque reads, Major Ezra Hawk Blackwood, USMC Lieutenant Ruth Castellano, USN Knight. Fighter Pioneers, June 15, 1945. 1 aircraft, 3 kills. 800 lives saved. The tactics they proved changed warfare forever. Next to the plaque hangs a photograph from 1945, a young man in a flight suit standing beside his aircraft. 25 years old, serious eyes, no smile, just a pilot who did his job. And beside him in the photo, barely visible in the background, stands a young woman in navy khakis holding a clipboard. Lieutenant Ruth Castellano, the voice that guided him home through the darkness. 2 people who proved that in a world of blindness, vision isn't about seeing, it's about trust. The kind of trust that lets you fly into a typhoon when everyone else stays grounded. The kind that lets you fire at a blob on a green screen, believing it's the enemy. The kind that lets you follow a voice through a storm, believing it will bring you home. Ezra Blackwood and Ruth Castellano never sought glory. They just did their jobs when no one else could. And in doing so, they lit the way forward for every pilot who would come after. The inscription at the base of the display reads simply, "They flew into the dark so others could live in the light."